Welcome to Press Review with me, Carmen Cracknell. Today we will continue looking at the Syrian crisis as well as Palestinian-Israeli negotiations in the wake of the prisoner release. But first, let's take a look at the front pages here in the UK. The Guardian leads its front page reporting on former Minister Alistair Burt, who says the decision to defy David Cameron on military action created a constitutional mess. It also takes a look at Formula One legend Michael Schumacher, who remains gravely ill in a coma after hitting his head on a rock in a skiing accident. The Independent leads its front page news with the headline £1 billion profit but not enough staff to keep the lights on. The article reports on a company blamed for a Christmas blackout mismanaged on the holiday rota and a paid chief executive paid £1.7 million salary. The Independent's front page also looks at David Cameron, who is accused of cronyism over New Year's honours list. The Daily Telegraph leads its front page news with a report on Nick Clegg, who claims that voting for UKIP will wreck the economic recovery. The Telegraph also looks at recruitment agencies offering Bulgarian migrants advice on how to exploit the benefit system when they arrive in Britain. As Israel frees 26 Palestinian prisoners and completes its third stage of the release, we take a look at various opinions on the Palestinian-Israeli talks. Reporting for Foreign Policy, Aaron David Miller writes an article titled "One More Last Chance: Is John Kerry quietly on the cusp of an Israel-Palestine peace talk breakthrough?" Here Miller says that he is encouraged about Kerry's efforts in the Palestinian-Israeli negotiations for several reasons. Miller states that as Secretary of State wants an agreement and is prepared to work relentlessly towards one is no guarantee of success, particularly when it's not clear whether the two sides really want one or that his own president has his back. However, there has been some narrowing of the gaps on the core issues, and that would simply not have been possible without Kerry. Miller claims that Kerry's commitment is, in a strange way, creates an infectious reality that can help risk-averse parties to a negotiation actually believe in its viability. Neither Netanyahu nor Mahmoud Abbas know how to reach an accord on their own. Miller says, make no mistake, Kerry would not have gotten this far if he wasn't working within Netanyahu's comfort zone. If an agreement is to be reached, everyone will need to stretch, but Bibi's willingness to acquiesce in this process flows largely from the fact that he believes he can put his own stamp on it, whether or not the accord is ever reached. Otherwise, like the P5+1 interim agreement with Iran, you'd be hearing a lot more static from him right now. According to Miller, if Abbas swallows some of this, Netanyahu will claim that he got more from an Arab partner than either Begin got from Sadat or Rabin got from Hussein, on an issue far more sensitive than any with Egypt or Jordan. If Abbas refuses, Bibi will still be in good with the United States, and he'll look like a hero defending key Israeli principles. Miller sees that the Palestinians are the weakest party to these negotiations, and they don't have much of an advantage to level the playing field. After all, they have threatened to walk away from the table at least twice. Lead negotiator Saeb Erekat even submitted his resignation. And guess what? The talks continue even in the face of significant Israeli settlement activity. Miller believes even though Abbas is weak, he still gains the prisoner releases, so hard for the Israelis to swallow, have already provided concrete deliverables and an emotional lift on the Palestinian side. Second, if an agreement is reached, it will produce language on borders and Jerusalem that will take Netanyahu further than he's been and closer to Palestinian principles. To conclude, Miller states that there are so many questions, so few answers, and there are no solutions in sight. But you have to start somewhere, and there's a pretty good chance that within the next month or so, we'll have a much clearer and better sense as to whether John Kerry's hard-fought effort is a key to an empty room or an open door on the road to the next phase of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. The Palestine Chronicle features an article headlined "On the Jewish State of Israel, Disarming Netanyahu," written by John V. Whitebeck, who analyses the obstacles of the Palestinian-Israeli talks. According to Whitbeck, news reports that continue to suggest that one of the primary roadblocks to any agreement in the current round of negotiations is the understandable Palestinian refusal to accept the Israeli demand that Palestine explicitly recognise Israel as or the Jewish state, a legally and intellectually bizarre demand clearly intended to make any agreement impossible, while facilitating Israel's post-failure public relations campaign to assign to the occupied Palestinian responsibility for Israel's latest success in producing failure. Whitbeck claims that Palestinian acceptance of this Israeli demand would constitute explicit Palestinian acquiescence in permanent second-class status for Palestinian citizens of Israel and in the liquidation of the rights of millions of Palestinian refugees, as well as implicit Palestinian acceptance that the ethnic cleansing of Palestine was morally justified, which in turn would require conceding that Palestinians are sub-humans not entitled to fundamental human rights. Whitbeck argues that no Palestinian leadership could accept this demand and survive. Israelis know that. That is why the demand is being made. Whitbeck views that if formalising the status of Israel as a Jewish state were a genuine concern of the Israeli government or a deeply felt need of the Israeli people and not simply a cynical gambit to achieve and excuse failure in negotiations, and if the Israeli government wished to proclaim this status officially to the world, the road is open and nothing is stopping Israel from achieving this on its own. However, Israel's preferred self-identification and official name are not matters in which the state of Palestine has any role to play. To conclude, Whitbeck states that whether or not the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah has any hope or fear that the current round of negotiations will produce anything, it should make the artificiality of the Israeli government's demand and the reasonableness of the Palestinian refusal to accept it emphatically clear in terms that the international community and particularly Western governments and peoples can understand. The EED features an article headlined "Violence Escalates as Mideast Peace Process Goes Crucial." Here the writer claims that violence in the Palestinian territories, mainly in the West Bank, might escalate as a 9-month US-sponsored peace process between Israel and the Palestinians is getting into its last crucial 4 months. The article claims that the coming 4 months will be crucial and might witness an escalation of violence amid a status of congestion. However, they ruled out that this would lead to a comprehensive security blow-up. The article quotes Ahmed Rafiq Awad, the political science professor at Al-Quds University in the West Bank city of Ramallah, who said the lack of Palestinian political support to the idea of having a third intifada almost rules out the possibility of a third intifada. Besides, he said the US wouldn't let violence between the two sides blow up. The article argues that Israel's attempts to annex parts of the Jordan Valley area in east of the West Bank kills peace process and its goal of a two-state solution, a senior Palestinian official said on Sunday. The article cites chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat, who claims that if Israel goes ahead with the plan to annex the Jordan Valley, says Erekat, the Palestinian leadership should resume bids to join 63 international and UN agencies, including the ICC. To conclude, the article states that the Palestinians halted their drive to become members of international organisations temporarily when negotiations with Israel restarted. In exchange for halting the Palestinian bids, Israel is releasing 104 long-time Palestinian prisoners on phases. As the Syria crisis continues, let's take a look at what the papers are saying about developments in the region. As the Syria crisis continues, let's take a look at what the papers are saying about developments in the region. Politics.co.uk features an article by Adam Bienkov titled "Christians Only, Nigel Farage Drops Syrian Refugee Call," regarding Farage's recent shock pronouncement that Britain should accept more Syrian refugees rather than merely sending aid to the country. Bienkov writes the UKIP leader caused a furious backlash from his party members over the weekend after saying that David Cameron had a duty to take on Syrian refugees fleeing for their lives. The call put him at odds with the coalition government, who are refusing to take any refugees from the country. The author added, however, in a U-turn which will lead to accusations of bigotry, he has now said that only Christians from the country should be admitted. Farage is quoted as saying, "It's bad enough for Sunni and Shia, at least there are neighbouring countries that will take them. Where on earth are the Christians going to go? Christians are now a seriously persecuted minority." The article concluded Farage's original comments made no mention of discriminating against Muslim refugees. He told the BBC on Sunday, "I think actually there is a responsibility on all of us in the Free West to try and help some of those people fleeing Syria, literally in fear of their lives." The Wall Street Journal has published an article by Lawrence Norman titled "Syria Chemical Weapons Deadline Likely to be Missed," which says that the mission of the Organisation for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, known as the OPCW, has been hindered by volatile security conditions and logistical challenges. According to the article, the OPCW said the delay, which was widely expected, was due to a range of factors, not least the continuing volatility in overall security conditions, which have constrained planned movements. A spokesperson said no new deadline has been set to carry out and complete the work. Under the OPCW-approved plan, the most dangerous category of Syria's chemical weapons were to be transported to the port of Latakia, where they would be shipped on commercial vessels provided by OPCW members. They are then supposed to be loaded onto a US ship and destroyed at sea. The article says that Ban Ki-moon's spokesperson added that the joint OPCW-UN mission would continue working intensively with the Syrian government to begin safe and secure removal and transportation operations as soon as possible. The article concludes the OPCW met its November 1st deadline for destroying critical chemical weapons production equipment, which the Netherlands-based organisation said means Syria cannot produce new weapons. Now let's take a look at top headlines from international papers. The International New York Times leads its front page with the headline, "China's tainted soil stirs fear in rice bowl." The Gulf News leads its front page with the headline, "Expo win the finest hour." The Global Times leads its front page with the headline, "Xi chairs reform team." For more updates, please visit levant.tv. Goodbye.